Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this fireside chat to learn about the engineering behind the scenes behind FalconX. I'm going to introduce Kushagra, who's going to introduce Tabby, our guest speaker for today. So the Zoogla community got to meet FalconX in 2017 during a founders meetup. It was Raghu, the CEO and co-founder, going to Founders Collective's offices, where we had 10 Zoogla founders meet the investor at Founder Collective. And we were asking questions with the community, essentially getting some insights from this investor. And over the years, we just got to know FalconX. The Zoogla Investment Syndicate was lucky enough to be given some allocation to invest in their company, and we've stayed close friends. And Kushagra and I knew each other from the first day the Zoogla community was founded back in 2015. He came to the first event in Galvanize in San Francisco, and since then he helped start the Zoogla Investment Syndicate. He's helping with a lot of Zoogla events and programs and launching a new way for us to engage as many community members as possible. We've now got 12,000 people. But here we are here to learn about how FalconX was built from the engineering side. So thank you, Tabby, for your time, and also for FalconX's support for the Zoogla community. And turn it over to you, Kushagra. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. I'm super excited to bring more and more people from FalconX to talk to Zoogla for two reasons. The first, I think there are connections. Our Google connection runs deep, both from like Raghu and Tabby being in Zoogla himself, if you guys didn't know that. And then, of course, like very recently, we hired John Kaplan, who was previously Chief Revenue Officer at Pinterest. He's going to come join us. He's already starting. This was the first week he started work as Head of Revenue for FalconX. I'm an ex-Googler as well. And then we have Morgan, who is the product manager over here. We have a few other engineers who are Zooglers. Another symbiotic relationship that we had a chance to double down on was acquiring a company called Yourbase, which was founded by Yeats, who is also a Zoogla based in Seattle. So very excited to keep engaging both independently and synergistically with the Zoogla community. I'm going to kick this off very quickly by thanking Chris, first of all, for being what you do all the time. Thank you so much. I also wanted to talk through a little bit about FalconX, and then then Tabby, we'll love for you to introduce yourself. Like Chris and I have been investing in a lot of like interesting startups for a while. FalconX, which we are just really lucky to be a small investor on FalconX's balance sheet, but at the same time, what this early stage experience has given us is like have a bird's eye view to like understand how these companies scale, like from OpenSea, where we are also an investor, FalconX, Solana, Harmony, Rally, Forte, SuperLayer. All of these companies gave us a chance to really like embrace Web3. And there are certain things that the founding team of these companies embody. They move very, very fast. And there is no better person to break it down than Tabby. I'm not going to introduce myself because Chris, you already did. Thank you so much for that. So I want to kick this off. I'm super excited to first, like there are two things I want to tell you about Tabby. Tabby never turns his camera on. So I'm glad that he's on camera. That's first. He lives like 10 minutes away from where our office is, but I never see him at office. So it's really cool to be in the same room as you, Tabby. Why don't you introduce yourself? Yeah. Start from the very beginning. We love hearing stories about where you grew up, how you formed your early childhood beliefs. What do you really wanted to do when you were young? Let's start there and like lead us to all the way of like how you ended up joining this.
Hey, first off, thank you, Chris and Kush, for hosting me here. Right. So a little bit of my background. I was born in Tuticorin in Tamil Nadu in India. Right. Growing up, I never imagined I'll be a computer science engineer, right? Because my interaction with computers were like less than 5 minutes, right? When I was in school, right? But luckily, I got into IIT Madras, right? And I got into computer science, and it kind of was like very exciting to me because you had the power of creation in your hand, right? That's why I decided to go deep into computer science. And after I graduated from IIT Madras, I joined Google in the Mountain View office. There, if you guys remember, in 2009, deep learning broke all the records in terms of like classification and so on, right? And in 2012, Google was trying to build this petabyte scale machine learning system, right? Because at Google scale, right, a normal system won't work. You have like process like petabyte of data, right? So I was lucky to be part of the team, which was building that system. And then I worked on a couple of applied machine learning problems at Google, right? I always think about myself as a person who wants to solve like product facing problems, right? So for instance, in Google Maps, you have this storehouse feature, right? It will tell you, if you search for a place, it will tell you when that place is busy, when it's free, what's the activity and so on, right? So that is being, aggregated across like millions of Google users, the data to kind of build that model. I worked on that project. Then I also worked on autocomplete at Google, right? Today we have this feature in Gmail, which is very popular. I was in a team which was trying to build that for Google Docs, right? A similar idea, but a different language model because the context is longer, right? Then I was part of the Google on-device machine learning team, right? Our goal was to bring the best of a Google Assistant to a device which is not connected to the internet, right? So if you're driving or you're in a hiking, right, we still wanted you to use the Google Assistant and get that benefit, right? So these are some of the projects I worked on at Google. Then I left Google, I entered the startup world, right? The first startup I worked on is a live streaming video startup, right? And it has social networking aspect to this. If you guys remember, now live streaming is very common, right? You go to any social network, you find that as a must-have feature. But 8 years back, right, it was a new phenomenon, and there was a few companies which were rushing to get that market, right? We were one of them. It's called MyLikes, right? Along with Meerkat, and Periscope, we were one of the contenders in that categories, right? I built the entire live streaming platform for them from scratch, and also added a machine learning component to the social network to kind of like increase the activity, right? Unfortunately, that didn't grow into a big business, right? We got acquired by Uber. Then I entered Eightfold.ai as a founding engineer. Eightfold.ai went on to become a success. It's a multi-billion-dollar company now. What Eightfold was trying to solve was to apply machine learning and deep learning to the talent management space, right? Today, we have systems which can understand human semantics, right? So why not apply that to like resumes and whole talent management system, right? That was their goal. So I worked on deep learning models to better understand a resume, right? Because today, right, the recruiters, if they are not experienced, right, they are just doing keyword matching, and they're missing out on a lot of candidates, right? Because Hadoop is very similar to MapReduce, but someone has to tell them to capture that intent, right? So we built a smart system which can actually understand the semantics of a resume, right? This was in 2016, 2017, and 2017 is where my entry into crypto started, right? If you guys remember, in 2017 we had this bull run where Bitcoin went to $20,000 and came back, right? During that period, the bull run was caused by a phenomenon called initial coin offering, where startups, they found a different model to raise money compared to the traditional model using the blockchain ecosystem, right? Instead of like building a product and pitching it to an investor, raising money, and then building it further and marketing, they inverted the game, right? They went to a community, marketed that idea, and raised money, along with that, right? So I became active during that period and helped a few companies write their ICO smart contracts. That was my first venture into the crypto ecosystem. So why switch from machine learning to crypto, right? So fundamentally, right, there's a lot of noise around crypto, right, in terms of like it being competing with the government currency and so on. But I think there are three fundamental building blocks of blockchain which can disrupt multiple industries. Right? That's what got me excited. To break that down, right, first is decentralized ledgers. Right? If you look at today's market, right, there are a lot of multi-billion-dollar companies which are just database as a service companies, right? And a decentralized ledger can go and potentially disrupt all of them, providing better, rates for using those ledger services to the customers and better privacy and all those good things. So that is point number one, right? I fundamentally believe that in 5 to 10 years, a lot of this database as a service companies will be disrupted with blockchain. Second thing is trust engineering. Trust costs money, right? And smart contracts, the idea of smart contracts can replace a whole set of like trust as a service companies, right? Today, if you want to do a back check on Kush, right? I'm just checking whether he's actually went to NIT, right?
I did not.
You did not? Okay. That's good new information. So, but we are paying money to someone to, verify your digital information, right? Now, smart contracts and blockchain can, solve for that as well, right? The third thing is ZK proofs. For a long time, right? Whenever you're using a product, right, you're giving them your data, and there's no control over what they will do with that data, right? But with ZK proofs, what it provides us is you can still, use some compute service, but the parameters are hidden, right? So you're getting the service as well as the privacy, right? So these are some of there are other use cases of blockchain as well, like micropayments, right? Today, there are a lot of, transactions which are not possible because the payment structure doesn't support that. But with micropayments, we can, bring new apps into the market, right? So there's plenty of reasons we can go into, but that's what excited me, right? So I switched from applied machine learning to blockchain and fintech, and has been with FalconX ever since.
Thank you, Tabby, for that intro. Like really inspiring. Like how you the kind of project that you worked at Google. Like I didn't know that you were on those teams. Now you are at FalconX. Like FalconX is a startup with an idea. Like you have a little bit of venture money, not the kind of like assets that we sit on top of today, but you have a little bit of money. You are the first engineer inside the company, and now you're building you're supposed to build something like an exchange, a trading product, whatever that is. How did you come about like sort of like starting to, because I remember you guys built something in 3 months. There are very few startups who go from an idea to actually having a product that can start making money in 3 months. So how did you do that?
Yeah. So the first step I think is like, understanding your customer deeply, right? Not to overbuild for them, but underbuild for them, right? That's one of the fundamental differences I'll bring it up, right? Because if you are trying to go behind all the use cases of a customer before understanding them deeply, right? You're spending a lot of engineering bandwidth and features which they may not actually end up using. So understand your customer first, go deep into what the actual use case is, right? And also think about how they can better, achieve their goals, right? Because most of the times the customers don't know how to achieve their goal. They have a goal in mind, but the product building is on the engineering side, right? That is number one. Second thing, right? The state of software development has changed drastically in the last 10 years, right? 10 years back, right? We had to go to our own data center, build a stack from scratch. And if you want a monitoring service, you have to integrate a library and so on and so forth. Now there's a lot of tools which you can buy to kind of focus on as a base and focus on your product, right? That's the second thing, right? Whenever you have an option between buy versus build, I would recommend buying, right? So that's the second thing I would say. The third thing, right, which really helps is using technologies which are proven, right? I've seen this mistake happening in multiple of my friends' companies as well, right? They pick something which is fancy, right? But FalconX, we never went for anything fancy. We only used, at least in the initial days, tested, proven technologies, right? There are two advantages of that. One thing, you are not spending a lot of time in maintaining those technologies because they are already proven. The second thing is it's also easier to hire, right? Because as a startup, right, your pool of candidates you can attract is really limited, right? So you want to be going with technologies which you can hire for, right? That is the third point I will bring up. If you want to bootstrap your team very quickly, right? Now coming to the second point on how to launch a product real quick, right? Here, one thing which a lot of people get incorrectly is speed doesn't necessarily mean you should sacrifice on perfection, right? A lot of companies make this mistake, right? Even companies I worked on before, right? They want to launch something quickly. They don't launch a perfect product, right? But I would say we launched a perfect product. So why were we able to launch it very quickly? We conditioned on the right customer, right? Now that's an art, right? That is one place where a lot of companies fail, right? They go to a market, they couldn't condition and get a segment of customers who they can solve for with a small team, right? FalconX got that correctly. So initial days, right, for the first 3 months, we build a product for low frequency, large block traders, right? So there's a lot of conditioning going on there. First of all, low frequency, right? These people are not looking for APIs and all those things, right? So that is number one. Large block traders. Now these people have a specific problem which was not solved in the market, right? None of the other exchanges were providing large block trading capabilities. So low frequency, large block conditional customers was our key, to the success of launch in the first 3 months, right? So picking your customer, and not going wide in the first 3 months is very important.
So now you have, you work with your product manager, Raghu in this case, and then you figured out that I'm going to go after a certain persona type. You very well articulated that. When is the time when you start putting pen to paper or start coding in that sense? And how did you run your engineering teams? And did you hire a few engineers in the first few days, or it was just you who's actually doing all the coding and instrumentation and ensuring that the product is doing what it is supposed to?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So to answer that, right, I'll characterize the difference between software engineering at a startup versus a big company a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Software engineering at a startup is an ill-posed problem, right? Unless you go and solve for it, you don't know what the problem is, right? Because there's a lot of unknowns which will come only when you actually put your hands to the keyboard and start writing code, right? So my recommendation is, as soon as you have an idea, as soon as you kind of identify the customer, you should start coding, right? You can start very small, right? That's where the customer conditional comes. But the idea is only when you go and write code and try to solve it, right? You'll identify additional problems, and so that you can get a full picture of what you are facing, right? That is number one. Second thing, hiring, right? Hiring is one of my favorite activities, in the initial days, right? Because when it comes to scrappy environment, right? Where you don't have a lot of resources. You have to like really be picky and choose, right? And you definitely want people who take extreme ownership, right? And who can cut across the entire stack. If you look at FalconX, right, the first 10 engineers we had, they can do front end, back end, DevOps, the entire stack by themselves. So any customer issue which comes along, they can solve it without any other guidance, right? That's what makes it more powerful, right? So those will be my recommendation.
I think Tavi, you have to say this, interject this. I know we don't talk enough.
Yeah.
Like we usually talk about work as we move on, but this is incredible. The insights that you're giving me is like something that I will take on to whenever I start my next company. That is bloody incredible. Thank you for that. I do want to get to the story quickly, and you're already giving us a lot of gold nuggets here. And then like open up for forum. I wanted to be a discussion because I think there are very specific problems that that our fellow Zooglers are asking. As you're talking about this, like tell us how you scaled your team. You hire full stack engineers, people who don't need a lot of like take extreme ownership. That's extremely important. And then now you're scaling up those. How did you scale up to your next 5-10 engineers?
So the way I think about scaling, right? I'm a little bit biased, and I feel like a lot of scaling should happen at the application layer. Right. I know like people kind of like try to buy products and so on and so forth, right? When they have a small team to kind of like scale their systems up, but I take a different approach there, right? And I also avoid microservices when we had a smaller team, right? That is one step which everybody does. They want to like have a grand diagram, split the components and all those things, right? But we had a monolith for a long time in our company, right? For the first 2 years of FalconX, it was just a monolith. What does that give you, right? It gives you all the data in one place. Right. So any engineer who wants to achieve anything in the product has this one place where he can go and write a few lines of code, access all the data, and get something out. Right. So that's the way we scale. Right. For the first 2 years, right, we had 10 engineers. We had a big monolith where all the data was sitting in the same place, so they are able to iterate very quickly and launch it. Right. Second thing which is important is an engineer should be able to take a line of code to production in a very short period of time. Right. Because even with the 10 people team, right, there are like 4 priorities which you are, tackling at any point in time, right? So what that does mean, right? They should first of all be full stack. They should be able to do the front end, back end, DevOps by themselves. And as a team, we should create tools for them to enable them to do that, right? So you'll see a big difference in your team as well. Once engineer is not like blocked on other engineers, but they're able to write line of code and launch it to the customer, right? The type of productivity you'll see like enormous, right? So that is another point I want to bring up.
No, I think now you're at 10 engineers. Now you're scaling up the team and keep going. I think you're saying all the right.
So in terms of hiring, right, there's subtle difference. See, right now we have 50 people, right? We hired 40 people in the last quarter, right? So the best way it is the best approach when you are scaling 10x or 100x, right, is to kind of like identify the layers within your ecosystem. Right? For example, at FalconX, I identify 3 layers, right? One is the product layer, another is the middleware or internal products layer, third is the platform layer, right? And why does the distinction matter, right? Because I fundamentally believe the type of people you should hire for these layers are different, right? Let me explain a little bit. Product, right? If you look at FalconX, it's not a single product, right? It's a prime brokerage. So we are building an amalgam of like 8 to 10 different product lines, right? And what you need that is you need the speed of iteration. You need people who are wickedly fast, who are smart, who are making this brilliant trade-offs, working closely with the product managers and iterating and delivering features on the product layer, right? These people shouldn't be bogged down by the details of scaling and other things, right? That's why the product layer is important, right? It's a very different personality. If you take the middleware layer, right? If you look at FalconX, right, a lot of these products have commonalities. For example, accounting. As a prime brokerage, right, we need an accounting layer for all these products. And that cannot be like built on every product line. It's tribal knowledge, right? And if the ideal way to do that is create a framework which is being used by all the products. So the middleware is focused on building frameworks for the product team, right? So here, what is needed? Here, we don't need people who can move wickedly fast. We need people who can build frameworks, right? Who has the tribal knowledge, who are consolidating that team and build that frameworks, which can be used by not only the 8 products I have today, but the 18 products we are going to build in the future, right? Now, coming to the third layer, which is platform teams. Platform teams, I think about them as core skill teams, right? For example, front end, right? There's a lot of core technologies, a lot of nuances you have to go inside, right? So platform team is set up such that you are hiring for skill set, right? So here we identified a few groups like GUI, data, DevOps, and we are going deep and hiring people who have that expertise, right? Now, the goal of the platform team and the middleware team is to make the product team successful, right? So when you start the startup, right, your startup is going to be very heavy on the first layer, which is the product layer, right? So I call it the inverted triangle, right? Everything is happening in the product layer. There's no platform team, there's no middleware team, right? Now people are duplicating code and so on. At some point, you have to make it a proper triangle, right? That's what we are trying to do now, but as we are scaling, right? So a lot of work should happen on the platform and is commonly, shared between like middleware and the product. And a lot of work is happening on the middleware, which is supporting the product, right? Product is very lightweight, so they can move fast.
Got it. Tavi, I have one last question, then we'll open up. I have actually a lot more questions to ask you, but I want to ensure we get questions from the panel. Like, as you're scaling, you built a tremendous, I'm a fan of like how fast this company moves. I don't think I've ever met anyone who moves as fast as it. Like talking to engineers is a delight. They're willing to, it's not a traditional like a PM engineer relationship. They just get in a room and we start doing things. From a culture perspective, also you've done a tremendous job in like establishing these guardrails. Of course, you will hold us accountable, but being supportive of like whatever like ideas that comes across the org is very refreshing to get from an engineering department. Like even at Google, I don't think this was the case. Last question to you before we open up for questions. Like you've done a lot of things, right? Where did you absolutely fucked up or like messed up a few things? I'm sure there'll be a few things along the way.
Well, that's a good question, right? So I think some of the mistakes we made, right, is not moving to a framework thinking earlier. Right? We spent we were excited about building products and seeing traction. We never thought about, making our stack at proper triangle, right? That is one thing which we are paying the price for now, right? That is one thing I feel like we should have course corrected, beforehand.
Yeah.
Right. I would say that is one of the mistakes we did.
Got it. Guys, I'll open up for questions. Anyone just unmute yourself, say your name and ask any question that you may have.
Can start. Well, thanks for that. That's really it's really interesting to listen to this. So there's actually two questions that I have, but I'll start with one. So how do you think about, I mean, especially because you have sort of a small performance team, how do you think about seniority of the team members that you're hiring, the engineering team members?
Yeah. So there is zero seniority, right? At least, when for the first 2 years of the company, right? And of course, there is some difference in titles, but the type of work people are doing, right? We kept it like extremely flat. So what does it mean, right? When you're incorporating that tactic, there was no meetings in which there was segregation, right? Everybody was allowed into every meeting, and there's no place where we say, hey, you shouldn't work in this module, right? Everybody was allowed to work in any module, right? So that's what gives you the speed in the initial days, right? So first 15-20 people, right? We kept it extremely flat. There's no hierarchy at all.
Go ahead, ask a second question.
Okay. No, go for it, Amelia.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Rob. I
All right, I'll ask the second. So this one alludes to the one I said right at the beginning. So how did you manage, or what tactics did you do, or strategies to get to like a highly performant application?
Yeah, so essentially, right, application performance is an iterative process, in my opinion, right? Because most of the things are systems engineering, and you have to be very structured when kind of like go and tackle these problems, right? It's you have to start measuring, right? Instrumentation is the key, first of all, to any of the system engineering problem. And the beauty of system engineering, right, is unless you build it and you actually run it in the environment, you won't know the properties of it, right? That's where some of the expertise can help, right? If you have a problem, right, going and talking with people who work on similar problems will be very helpful in system engineering, right? But ultimately, it boils down to measuring your system and iterating till you get that performance goals, right? So it's a very iterative process, as I've seen in FalconX.
Cool, thanks.
Amelia?
Thanks. So Tavi, I just wanted to follow up a little bit about what you said about not moving to a framework early enough. I think we're kind of at that stage now where there's a lot of stuff happening at that product area, but I kind of feel like we need to move. But I think that's my struggle, is like, how did you what would you think would be the ideal? Do you think there is a trigger to identify where that point is, or like, how did you guys decide when to move into that, into, more of a framework arrangement? And you said you wish you had done it earlier. When would you have thought that would be the right time?
Yep. So the key to identify that is like when there's duplication of work across your teams, product teams, right? So when multiple teams are solving the same problem, that means like you have to commonize, right? That is number one. And it's an extremely hard problem, right? Especially in an environment like FalconX, right? And it's sort of also like, changing the tire of a moving car, right? It's an extremely hard problem. So the way we tackle it here is we keep the product team moving forward. So we don't slow them down, but we force another couple of folks who can go and build that framework, and their job is to come and disrupt this existing products, right? So we kind of decouple that to kind of like make that happen.
Thank you. That's helpful to think about. Thank you.
So hi Kush and Tabby. So I got a question there. I'm Shaquille. So I'm currently the Chief Data and Information Officer for Demand Science, company that does data, and I'm right now inherited a big development team. In my previous company, when I left Google, actually created a company out of India, and I think we were partnering with Triple IT Kanchipuram, whereby we got all the engineers coming in and doing this. And I think, it's like get some ideas from you, because when I did that, when I left Google, so I had a partnership with I3 Kanchipuram and another one with Coimbatore in India, and also in Armenia, because lots of mathematicians there do a lot of machine learning. But I find it kind of challenging, right? Unless you go there regularly to do that. And I've seen, for example, in FalconX, you have a entity in Bangalore, obviously. That's where, I created my own company. So how are you managing all of these cultural differences, the time zones? Because, I always tell this when I was in India, the minute I got on the plane, I know things were going to get delayed, right? So how do you manage these very highly skilled teams, and how often do you need to go to your offshore center in Bangalore to make sure they're still on track?
Right. So the key to some of this remote team management is giving more ownership to them, right? And so that they can make an end-to-end decision, right? They might make it like incorrect 1 or 2 times, but slowly they learn and they kind of like come into the culture, right? That is number one. Second thing, right? It was a challenge for us.
You can also continue with Rumble and that's fine. You guys okay. So what did I decide?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it was challenging for us as well, right? In terms of like communication. So the way we broke it down and we succeeded is we started having 2 syncs every day, right? 1 in the morning and 1 in the night, right? India being in a 12-hour window, right? So we touch base every morning to kind of like talk about any blockers, like a stand-up, right? We do that before we sleep as well, right? That way we kept the machine going, right? But the key to like making any remote team successful, I think, is like, making them the boss, right? Giving them more ownership so that they can, deliver that on that end-to-end, yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that's very good. And I moved to Canada right now because of the time zones, because I typically start at 5 o'clock in the morning, follow the Bangalore team, then I go to to the UK, then go down here. So I think I know what it is. So yeah. But I think just one thing where I believe that the talent pool is huge, right? And I think because you talk about blockchain distributed ledger, but I think the distributed workforce is very important. And I think the lessons learned is that if you give ownership and you give responsibility and you have C-level people out of India, actually it works quite well. So just a tip for those who are considering India, but there's a way you need to work there.
Makes sense. Any other questions?
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. Tabby, it's Paul. I really appreciate the structure in which you kind of think about the team and development. I work with a lot of startups, particularly in like Latin America. So if you think about the cost to hire in Latin America and maybe even Southeast Asian countries, it doesn't really compare to the expenses of the US. So when these startups in these regions have any kind of funding, they are really quick to hire, right? So you either like hire fast and fire slow, or like you hire slow and like fire fast. Curious to know like what your take on that. I with FalconX, you guys had the luxury and like the privilege of having revenue to be able to justify the additional headcount, right? But like when you think about seed stage or like even Series A, when they're still trying to prove the revenue and the business models, like do you have a framework in terms of like how you think about hiring and bringing on talent, and at what speed, and what is the litmus test?
Yeah, so the test consists of 3 things. One is whether they are, passionate about, working for a startup, right? And it always boils down to whether they have worked on another startup, right? Only people who work on a startup, right? They have that scar tissue, right? So they understand, what it takes to build a company, right? And I think the scar tissue is very important, right? The first 5 people I had, they are from startups, right? The second thing, I hire extremely hands-on people, right, who are resourceful, right? Part of my interview question is like, whether you are able to Google effectively, right? So having people who are extremely resourceful and hands-on is like very important, right? The third thing is people who can take ownership, right? See, ultimately, right, even if you have like 5 or 10 people, right, or even if you have 100 people who don't, see, compared to like having 10 people who take ownership, it's better to have 10 people who take ownership than 100 people who don't take ownership, right? So passion, right, for startups, right, and the signal there is whether they have worked on startups before, right? Second thing, extremely hands-on. This boils down to like doing a couple of interview rounds with them where they actually code and show you, and taking ownership, right? For the third one, we typically do assignment, right? We give them a very ill-posed problem, very high-level problem, and give them, go solve it, right? Now they have to go and research on the problem. They have to like understand different segments. They have to like make that decision, right? And come back to us and say, hey, this is the solution I want, right? So these are the 3 things which we kind of like look for: whether you have startup experience, whether you can crack our interviews, how much effort are you putting into the assignments.
Just a quick feedback. So if you have the funding and the resources to be able to hire a lot, like where do you kind of like put the brakes on it, right? So whether you go with 5 new engineers at this point or 20, and then or you kind of spread it out across a quarter, like any thoughts around that?
Yeah,
my founders are like very eager to bring on people because they're like, oh, we have something to solve and we can like throw people at it, then that's great. But at Google, we never really threw people at the problem, right? We kind of had to like be more resourceful with things. So it's kind of counter to what we've been kind of disciplined and trained to think about talent.
No, definitely. See, I personally don't think throwing people at a problem is going to necessarily solve it, right? What I have seen, which works very well for me, is hiring if you have a specific problem. Let's take this specific example, right? You have a problem in the company and you want to like hire a team to solve it, right? How to proceed, right? First of all, I look for a lead for the team, right? My hiring starts with that lead, right? Once we get the lead person, then I'll ask them to make a proposal on like how many headcount they need and what solutions they are having in mind, right? That way we can brainstorm and we come to the exact solution which we both agree upon, right? That's the way I go on a top-down approach there.
Yeah, by the way, one thing I do have to say, like of all the hiring managers at FalconX, like Tabby is the most particular. Like I don't get to see I have a little bit of a perspective on like how everyone gets hired at FalconX. Like you can tell when an engineer is walking through the doors like that they have been like tried and tested, and like there is no doubt left in mind that they will deliver, and that's very rare. I think it's this is how I feel like the first 1,000 people at Google were probably hired. Like very like it's okay to do like 9 interviews. It might not be the most efficient process, but once you walk in the door, you own it. You have earned the stripes and you belong, and then there are no question about your ability and what you will be able to contribute.
No, that is true, right? For example, last year we interviewed 150 candidates for each candidate we hired. Right, so that's the ratio we are working with right now. So we're being extremely choosy at this point, to bring in the best talent.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll fix it as we scale, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, go for it, man.
Yeah, my question is like, so you mentioned something about proven technologies. Would you mind giving an example like of something like that was a proven that you used? And the second question is like, because you worked on smart contracts, can you like give me like give us like a very quick explanation of what are optimistic ROPs, if you, yeah.
Yep. So let's talk about the first question, right? How do we identify technologies which are proven, right? So technologies is a broad term. So let's break it down, right, in your stack, right? So typically when you're going and designing any system, right, there's going to be a couple of programming languages involved. There's going to be a cloud environment involved. There's a database and other systems which are involved, right? And more importantly, once you pick a language, you are going to have an option for like tens of libraries for each and everything you are going to do, right? So that is the split up. Now in that setting, right, a lot of people, they look for like fancy programming languages from what I've seen, right? But it's important to like, choose a programming language for which you can hire for, right? Because you definitely don't want that to be your bottleneck for scale, right? Okay. Second thing, picking a cloud environment and the services, right? Today, the cloud environment, right, they have evolved so much that a lot of managed services are available, right? These are very cost effective because these services are less than the time, cheaper than putting engineer to build that same service for you, right? So I will go and pick those things, right? I love AWS, right? A little biased because we have been using that for the last 3 years, but they have like amazing managed services which you can use to bootstrap your application on day one, right? Now, say you chose Python, right? Now, say you want a library for like sending emails, right? A very simple example. Now, what we do is we go to like, most of the times these libraries are open source. We go and pick libraries with the most activity, right? With the most stars, with the most usage, right? We don't want to be picking libraries which are not used that much, which has like bugs and other issues, right? So this is the tactics which we use, like when we are proving, when we are kind of like going behind what we need to pick and choose for our stack, right? And of course, the fourth thing which matters is your team's sentiment, right? Because you don't want to be like picking things tactically which your team doesn't like, right? It has to go hand in hand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with optimistic rollouts, so
I can take that. Yeah, again, we can, like, there are some people who are experts here. Happy to like connect you. I'll be able to give you a general overview, man.
Okay, yeah, that works. That works.
Yeah, I'll set up time with you.
Thank you.
Oh, Morgan is on the call. That's amazing. At least we have one more familiar face. Any other questions from our community?
Can I just have one more follow-up question? I'm sorry if we have time.
Yeah.
So I know there was a bit of discussion around offshoring. So that's kind of something that we're having to look at now as well because of just resource constraints. Like, what are some of your experiences? Like, when do you think that, like, because obviously some of the considerations we're having to balance out is, having everyone in the one location allows us like just to be quicker and faster. But what would you think is the right sort of timing or trigger to kind of oh, sorry, there's a bit of echo.
Let me mute. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, that was it basically. Like, what are some of the things that you think give us like the indication that this is the right time that we should be looking, that this is the right time to think about offshoring?
Yeah, so if you're building a product company, right, I would think about offshoring not based on time, but based on those modules, right? Because you don't want to be offshoring something which is critical to your product, right? So the key there, right, is to identify commodities within your architecture and identify whether an offshore team can deliver that. For instance, right, when we started FalconX, when we were only 10 engineers, we didn't have a DevOps team, right? No, I was handling DevOps for the company, but we didn't have a DevOps team. But there's a lot of like projects, a commodity which we wanted to get delivered. So that is something we offshore, we used to offshore team for, right? So I would go from that architecture perspective, right? That could be things in some products, right? You can actually offshore the UI, right? That is something I look into. But product experience, features and scaling up, right? These are very difficult to, give it to a third party team.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? And welcome, Ankit. All right, I have a few more. Sure. If we can, because we have time, let's continue this. I'm learning a lot more here. So Tabi, let's think about a scenario where, and these are like scenarios that are like, these are more subcognitive. Like suppose, like you've been asked to build, and we were joking about this morning that that you're basically engineers are labor class. But if you're asked to build something that you don't fully agree with, like as a good engineer and a great engineer, how will you like push back? Like what's the relationship with the PM should be?
Well, that's a very good question and a complicated question. Yeah. Right. See, typically, right, I evaluate things I build from a market standpoint, right? Whether this is going to, how it is like impacting the customer, right? That's how I think about it. Is it going to like bring revenue to the company, or is it going to like delight the customer from a UX perspective, or is it going to solve a pain point for the customer, right, in some other direction, right? And most of the times I don't disagree with the feature itself with PMs, but the prioritization is where the problem happens, right? Morgan can attest to that, right? Because if you have infinite resources, right, I would ideally say, hey, yes, go build everything, right, to kind of like solve for that, right? But the pushback I typically give to PMs are, right, is it something which is going to like, change the experience of the customer, right? That's the question I put forward to them. And why do they believe that is going to happen, right? Yeah. So I try to bring them to my viewpoint, right? To say, hey, this is how I evaluate any feature I'm building, or do you agree that this is going to happen, right? Yeah. And most of the times, right, that is a discussion, and we were able to achieve a good result.
Yeah. Let's do one last question, Remy, which is like, where do we go from here? What are you going to do to take your engineering team 10x, or what's your moonshot?
Yeah, that's a very good question, right? So what worked great for us so far, right? We were able to demonstrate that we are an amazing engineering team with 10 engineers, right? Now we have this part structure where we are essentially dividing the 100 engineers we are having into like 10 parts and managing like 10 startups, right? That's the mode we are running, right? Now, I think if you're going to like 500 and 1,000, we need like one more layer, right? That's something we think about in the engineering organization, right? Today we are a startup of like 10 startups, right? How are you going to scale to 100 startups, right? That's something we are deeply thinking about.
Perfect. Tabby, are there any more questions? Let me check one more time. Otherwise, I think I'm happy to return about 12 minutes back to your life. Any other questions from the panel? I learned a lot, Tabby. First of all, like this is, dude, I should talk to you more. Like that's my big takeaway. I don't spend enough time with someone who literally sits next to me. Any other questions, team? Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending almost 45 minutes with us this evening. Really appreciate it. And if you have any additional questions, please send them across. Like Tabby or I will, or I can coordinate on Tabby's behalf and compile back an answer to you. But super excited that we could have it. Thank you for your time,
I think
Tabby.
Morgan thinks something.
All right. Just one.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate that. And Morgan, I'll tell you the valuation.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Howard.